What kind of language enables us to explore the puzzle, the pain and the paradox of suffering and evil in our world? Clear and honest words are needed when too often Christian leaders and theologians speak in riddles or spin. But clarity and truth are awkward bedfellows when it comes to suffering and evil. We also need a more intuitive language which speaks to a deep, hidden part of human existence suffering, especially those of us, or those parts of us which remain in denial. Let me illustrate what I'm proposing through the writing of C.S. Lewis, famous Christian writer and apologist from the middle of last century. Lewis was a prolific Christian author, as I mentioned, in the middle of last century, and he wrote a number of books including, but not limited to, Mere Christianity, The Problem of Pain, Screwtape Letters, The Narnia Chronicles, and A Grief Observed. Now, hopefully many of you will be familiar with some of his books, and if you've never heard of him, then do yourself a favour and at the end of this subject indulge a little and read some of his wonderful books. But there is a substantial difference in the style of prose displayed in these books. For example, from his earlier books such as Mere Christianity and The Problem of Pain, Lewis writes in straight prose using what he called theological language. Now, theological language for Lewis did not mean lack of clarity or truth. In fact, these works made him famous for the opposite reason. Lewis tackles the problem of pain with clarity and conviction, making famous phrases like God whispering to us in our pleasures, speaking to us in our conscience, but shouting in our pain. It is Lewis who coined the phrase, it is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. But Lewis considered this kind of language an apologetic mode of discourse, arguing for the intellectual credibility of the Christian faith. And he was really good at it. Probably the best of his generation, and some might argue in successive generations no one's been better. He helped form the Socratic Club at Oxford University, a debating club where Lewis took on all comers in the heady 1950s when the science versus faith debate was at its peak. But during his writing career and academic career, Lewis also came to appreciate that Christian truth could also be communicated, often better communicated through what he deemed poetical language compared to the more traditional theological language. Examples from his own writing include the children's books, the Narnia Chronicles, which reflect poetic rather than theological language. Other examples include the Screwtape Letters and the sci-fi trilogy, which capture an evolving perspective on other ways to communicate God's truth. None of these, however, if you're familiar with them, are untheological in their content. And so as we begin to reflect on one of the more complex themes in this introduction to Christian theology, theological perspectives on suffering and evil, the contrast is most striking between Lewis' early classic, The Problem of Pain, and one of his latest books, Till We Have Faces, which is incidentally my own personal favourite book by Lewis. Till We Have Faces is written for and about rationalists who, in desiring what he calls the clear, hard, limited and simple, must still account for the unseen mystery of the gods. In Till We Have Faces, the contrast between clear, precise, honest, theological language and the more puzzling, painful and paradoxical, poetical language is portrayed through two main characters. The clear precision of Greek wisdom is portrayed by a character named the Fox, and the paradoxical, pain-filled, holy mystery of the old priest from the House of Ungat. And as the story of Till We Have Faces unfolds, the shortcomings of mere rationalism, the Greek wisdom of the Fox, becomes obvious. The most explicit condemnation of the fox's philosophy is made early by the old priest of the house of Ungern, who says these words: "We are hearing much Greek wisdom this morning, and I've heard most of it before. Much less does it give them understanding of holy things. They demand to see things clearly, as if the gods were no more than letters written in a book. I, king, have dealt with the gods for 3 generations of men, and nothing that is said clearly can be said truly about them. Holy places are dark places. It is life and strength, not knowledge and words, that we get in them. Holy wisdom is not clear and thin like water, but thick and dark like blood." Now, I still get goosebumps every time I read those words. Holy places are dark places. It is life and strength, not knowledge and words, that we get in them. And in Lewis's reflections on the psalm, he confesses that all our language about such things, that of the theologian as well as that of the child, is crude. In his earlier book, The Problem of Pain, Lewis asked clearly, if God is good and powerful, he asked this question: if God were good, he would wish to make his creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he would be able to do as he wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either the goodness or power or both. Decades later, in A Grief Observed, after the death of his own wife, Joy Davidman, Lewis honestly wonders, with these words: "Sooner or later I must face the question in plain language. What reason have we, except our own desperate wishes, to believe that God is, by any standard we can conceive, good? Doesn't all the prima facie evidence suggest exactly the opposite? The terrible thing is that a perfectly good God in this matter is hardly less formidable than a cosmic sadist." Until we have faces, Lewis asks the question in a very different way and proposes a novel way forward. What is the true nature of God's sometimes hidden face? God does not answer us until we have faces. You see, there is a need for each way of speaking about God in the face of evil and suffering. Clear, precise language that does not obfuscate. As theologians, we should not sound like politicians. We need honest, searching language that does not evade the truth of our circumstances and the world's suffering. So as theologians, we should not sound like spin doctors, but puzzling, paradoxical, even pain-filled language that honours the mystery of the holy. So as theologians, we should not neither sound like overconfident new atheists. I don't know which language you need to hear as you work your way through this unit on suffering and evil. I want us to value and affirm each way of speaking about God, each way of exploring evil and suffering, particularly in this unit. If you need to speak to me, please get in contact. I would love to talk through some of the issues that may come up for you as we study this unit together.